All right, hello everyone. I'm really glad that you're here with us this evening. I'm Megan Hunter-Gauthier, the Assistant Curator at Two Rivers Gallery. And I am joined here tonight by Mark Thibeault, who's... Hello, Mark. Mark's exhibition has just opened in the Rustad Galleria. It is called Succession. And we're gathered here this evening on the traditional territory of the Lheidli to celebrate this opening. So I'd love to dive into this Q&A with Mark by first asking, Mark, you're an interdisciplinary artist, and I was wondering if you can describe your practice a little bit. So what mediums and disciplines do you work in?
Sure. I'm a guitar builder, a musician. Are you there? I'm a guitar builder, musician. Oh. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, I think we're having a bit of a lag. It's okay though.
Okay, yeah.
You just keep talking, I'm here.
Okay, good. A guitar builder, musician, and a painter, an artist, a visual artist. Yeah, and I paint using acrylic, ink, and oil. In music, I play pedal steel and assorted guitars. And as a guitar builder, various acoustic instruments.
So do you find that as a multidisciplinary artist, a musician, and you're going to have to help me with this one, luthier, thank you.
As long as you help me with automatism.
Yeah, no
Did I get that right?
You did, you got it right.
Nice.
So a luthier is someone who builds stringed instruments, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. I've been doing that for 27 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, I built, my company's built about 425 instruments and shipped them all over the world.
All over the world?
Yeah, we've got a banjo in Estonia and Hawaiian guitars in Switzerland, and yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
It is, yeah.
Do you find that your practice creating musical instruments and as a musician influences your visual arts practice?
It does, and it goes both ways. I mean, obviously the visual arts aspect of it helps with the design of the instruments. I will occasionally, when I'm designing instruments, take a couple hours just to correct a 2-inch line on the outside of the guitar, on the design of the guitar.
So you really see that connection then?
I do, and it's also it's kind of a common language too. Like when I'm painting, as when I'm creating music, I think in terms of texture and weights and moods and lines, composition. I've got some notes here to myself I'm referring to as well. But yeah, the one thing about guitar building that affects my art is my art is very cathartic. So when you're working in fractions of an inch, thousandths of an inch all day long building guitars, then you get into the studio to paint, you can imagine how much of a release that is. And that really helps with just being more expressive. It's a real outlet. It's not just the cathartic process of it though, but it is freeing. It's very freeing to be able to step up to a canvas and just start moving paint.
I'd love to dive into your visual arts practice a little bit more. And for the audience, we have a little slideshow prepared. So I'm just going to share my screen right now. One moment, some technical difficulties. Okay.
It is, yeah. Good.
Awesome. Awesome. So everyone should be able to see this right now. And just sort of, we want to share a little bit of imagery from the exhibition. So this image right here is the title wall for Mark's show. And you can see one of the very first paintings on the wall. And Mark, I'd love if you could describe, as we click through some of these images, your painting style.
Sure. It's I wrote down a few descriptives just to kind of help along. It's really based. What's abstract expressionism? It's primarily abstract expressionism. I'm really inspired by the idea of immediacy, spontaneity, and surprise. Like surprises in paintings really inspire me. So much so that I'll use spatulas. I was out in the garden one day and I saw a bolted lettuce shoot stalk, and I thought that would just be an incredible paintbrush. So brought that in to paint. So there's that idea of surprise and just always trying to reinvent things, like just reinvent things as I'm going along, you know, just trying to re-inspire myself. It's very physical. I like to kind of work on wood because I can lean into it. I could scrape it. I can even get in and take away the substrate, you know, just peel into it, build on top of it quite easily. It takes, I tried doing that on my floor here in my studio with that roll of canvas I was telling you about just before we went live on the air. And I actually scraped right through the canvas. I mean, it was just, I wasn't thinking about it. I just needed to make these marks, and it actually scraped right through the canvas. So it's very physical, the style, reactionary. It's, you know, I'll whatever marks I put down, I'm kind of reacting to those marks again. So it's kind of, it develops a reciprocal relationship with the canvas where I'm inspired by the canvas, and then I go to the canvas, and then something happens, and it's a reciprocal relationship. I just keep going back to it. I wrote down the word excavating because to me, that has a lot to do with it too. I build a lot of different layers sometimes. And I scrape through those layers, or I'll take some solvents or whatever and wipe away layers to expose the underpainting and that kind of stuff. So it's, yeah, kind of an excavating, I guess. And witnessing, that's a large part of it too. I think it's just being aware as what's going on in front of you. Always being aware, like when you do make a mark, what that effect has. There's a, I guess in the word witnessing, to me that means almost like you're not there. So in my process, I try and remove myself from the work. I try and allow the work to kind of use me, and so I'm there more as a witness, and I feel like I'm reacting to what I'm doing. So yeah, and then you recognize, witnessing also has to do with you recognize when there's a formal, when the formal elements all come together. You need to be able to identify that. Sometimes that happens within a few minutes of the piece, you know, and then you have very little left to do with it. That one that's up right now, that's Lefty takes the lead, and that was a very, very quick piece, and it's one of my favorite and strongest pieces to me because of the energy that it's got. And sometimes it takes me, you know, 3-4 months on the same canvas to get that same energy, you know, and that is a big part of it. Witnessing, like just seeing that there it is. That's when you know it's done. Like when you have that feeling that it's all come together formally, aesthetically, then that's what my job is there. Yeah.
And with these canvases here, just continuing our tour down the Galleria, you see some really bright colors, as opposed to the other one, which was a little bit more calm. So you definitely, your color palette is all over the place, and you don't shy away from any kind of color.
Yeah, and I often say when I'm teaching workshops, like allow the palette to find itself, and sometimes they're just really, really, you know, just crazy colors like that one there. It's just absolutely, that one is called Carnivorous Ritual. And so the idea of just ritual being the idea of celebration and color, and it just had this feel about that for me. So yeah, the palette, it finds itself. Like this one was actually having a lot of fun with oil sticks too. I just discovered oil sticks, and that piece, you'll see the time lapse. I think you've got that queued ready to go at some point, but there's a time lapse photo of the underpainting of that one there, and it just became hugely colorful because I was just enjoying these oil sticks so much. And the funny thing about that piece, and talking about witnessing, is that there were a few marks under where that big red splotch is on the top right side there. There were a few marks that just weren't working with the overall composition. And then I was working with my good friend and a great painter, Mark Turo, at the time in the shared studio here. And he had suggested getting rid of those marks. So I, as I often do, I try to throw all caution to the wind, and I just go in and I'll change those marks. So I just took some of my red stain that I had and I just kind of splashed it in that area. And then that was that moment. That was the witnessing. It was like, well, that really did something very, very, it kind of completed the piece for me. And I think I did a little bit more with the oil sticks over top of that layer. But that was that idea of just abandoning, any expectation of a final piece. And just, usually that's when the pieces come together too, is when I kind of have no further expectation of the piece. Sometimes there's pieces that I'm about to abandon, and I'll just throw something at it. It's like, well, that really did something interesting. So that's a surprise element too, right? But yeah, that one's a very, very colorful palette. And it depends on the materials I'm using. Sometimes I'll use ink, and like Lefty Takes the Lead, it's a pretty limited palette compared to this one. Sometimes ink and acrylic paint, and few colors, but yeah, I try not to be too prescriptive about what colors I approach the canvas with either. Like I said, I think the palette will find itself, and I need to be able to identify that it's working together. And I can tell when I'm putting a color down that's just really not working. I think this one has a more of a anything goes kind of feel about it though,
Yeah, and I love that the underpainting is so different, and all of you will get to see that now in the next slide. So
there's moments along in doing this that in watching this video that I wished I had stopped, and I didn't. So it's one of those things where it just didn't present itself as complete. I've got somebody trying to chime in here. Sorry about that. Yeah, so it didn't present itself as complete, and like right around this moment here, I thought there were some strong things happening, but there was still something that wasn't happening. But rather than come in and be really prescriptive with a couple lines and try and correct things, I usually just kind of abandon it, and I within a matter of 2 or 3 hours, it can be 5 different paintings, and hopefully the one that I end up with at the end of those 3 or 4 hours is the strongest, but sometimes I abandon some very strong pieces for something that's just not as strong,
Yeah, and I like that you continue to experiment and evolve your paintings. I mean, when you told me that this was actually the underpainting for Carnivorous Ritual, I was blown away.
Yeah.
But also really excited to know that it just shows how much building is involved in your work, building and editing.
Yeah. Not every piece, but it's a large part of it. Like just really building up those layers, and then getting close to a completed composition, and then just abandoning it by just throwing something else on top of it. And what ends up happening, and this is something from university too, that I remember at Del Doc, it was, don't get rid of those lines that aren't working. They're kind of like the thread that takes you to, I'm paraphrasing here, but the idea was that they inform the next step, like those lines will inform the next step. So your piece just builds off of that, so there's no right or wrong. Anyhow, yeah. So all those different layers as I peel through, once it builds up, then I peel back through it, or I take solvents and wipe it back. It just becomes this kind of stained underpainting, you know, and it adds another level to it, you know.
Mm-hmm. And now is a good time to mention, if any of our audience has questions, please feel free to type them in the Facebook chat. We'll reserve some time at the end for Mark to answer some of your questions. Moving on, if it will let me. There we go. So this is the painting that hangs across from Carnivorous Ritual, and I love it. And I love hanging it across from Carnivorous Ritual because they're very similar. They kind of speak to each other to me. Mm-hmm. But this one is a lot more heavy with the paint. There's thick layers of paint on it, whereas Carnivorous Ritual doesn't have that. And you can see that a little bit in this imagery. You get the sense that it's really built up. So is that something you do often with your work? Building up paint in like an impasto way, or is this a little bit left field?
Well, that was actually the first exploration with the oil sticks, and but that canvas there, that's probably the heaviest canvas you have in the show, because I had a piece that I thought was complete. It was probably 30 years ago, and that's the same canvas. So I probably kept that for about 5 years, and then painted over it again, and then again and again and again. And then just this past fall, I decided that I didn't care for the piece that I, you know, had toted around for 25 years. I didn't care for it any longer, so I just decided to paint over it. So it's got a lot of, there's a lot of texture on that canvas, and with that amount of texture, as you're going over it with the oil sticks, you know, that texture just picks up heavy paint. You know, I'll burn through half of one of those oil sticks in one sitting, you know, and that's the result of it. This is probably not the best. That's a photo from my iPhone. It's probably not the best representation of the color. The picture you have of it on the wall is a great representation. But yeah, it's it was just really having fun with the oil sticks. And that's the thing too about the oil sticks, is they really lend to the. I like to draw. I think that's my strongest thing, are the lines, you know. And I like to draw. I like to draw using Chinese brushes and whatever. But you know, the calligraphic element of it, I guess, is the oil sticks just lend themselves to that so much, you know, and I love that.
And this sort of brings us to another point of discussion. All of the paintings in this exhibition are drawn from 3 different series that Mark has worked on. Most of them are from the populated series, but I wanted to sort of use this as an opportunity to talk about each of these series that you've identified in your work. And sure, if you could explain each of them in brief and sort of the ideas that drive them.
Sure, I'll start off with the Cycles series first, the one on the far right there. That's when I did the Cassier Cannery Residency in 2019. And it was, if you've never been in the Cassier Cannery, it's an incredible bed and breakfast. And there's all these outbuildings that are, with many outbuildings. Some are being reclaimed and repurposed by the owners, and they're being made into a bed and breakfast, and it's beautiful. It's a really cool environment. But the buildings that are just too far gone, and they were of great purpose, you know, 80 years ago when it was an actual cannery, are now just, you could see nature just taking it over completely, and you could see the moss, you could see them falling into the water, you could see the moss kind of growing on it, and it's just totally being reclaimed by nature, you know. And there's so that's the Cycles series is all about that, about just, but I think there's an underlying theme in that even as things are growing and developing, they're passing. Like so that's part of the Cycles theme, and it's not a good thing, a bad thing, a sad thing, or a melancholy or anything like that. It's just that's the fact, you know. So cycles kind of speaks to that more than, yeah. So that speaks to that. Elements is kind of, I did a few pieces last year that really had kind of broad brushstrokes and broad areas of color, and it was kind of ethereal feeling, like this one does have this elements. This the one in the middle there, the elements, is called As It Is in Heaven, because it's got this kind of ethereal and you know, heaven-like quality about it, I suppose, you know, sky-like quality or whatever. So I kind of categorize that in the elements series. And then getting back to cycles, cycles is probably the most intentional of the three series. It's the one that I really, you know, the other two series, they happen intuitively, whereas the cycle series, it may start out with a very abstract piece, but I'll try and bring in elements that look like a landscape, or look like a boat decaying on a shoreline or something like that. You know, it starts out with an abstract piece, then it becomes that with a little bit more intentionality. The other two are definitely more automatism. So yeah, and populated, I started to recognize these different forms as I was painting. This is getting ready for my show that I had in Smithers 2 years ago. And I noticed these forms that were kind of presenting themselves, these kind of dark, humorous-like characters, you know, figure-like characters. And they had these personalities. So I kind of went with that. It's more, yeah, it's more, there's more drawing in that, than a little bit less brushwork. There's more drawing in the populated series. There's, it's more animated, I guess. And something that happened when COVID hit, I recognized that my painting style had changed from what I might have done in elements with the broad, big brush strokes. And even though that one's a little busier piece, that one there, but I noticed that things changed a little bit. You know, I was, it didn't feel right at that first month or whatever to go into the canvas and be expressive and just kind of get out there and be open and expressive. You know, it just really felt that I say it felt like I was dancing at a funeral or something. It just felt too big and too grand, and where I was just kind of feeling as we all did, you know. And so my mark making was smaller. You know, it was still kind of intuitive. I wasn't thinking about where I was going. I would try and if I found myself thinking about it too much, even though I would try and break that pattern. You know, I try and trick myself, but the marks were way smaller. So the canvases became a little bit busier with these smaller characters. So I call it populated because the canvas became populated with many smaller of these characters, you know. And that's kind of where I'm going with right now. I'm doing a series of these for the Affordable Art Fair and New Powell Fine Art in the UK. And they're smaller ones. They're on ink and acrylic on paper, watercolor paper.
Thanks, Mark, for explaining that. Yeah, I find looking at all your work, although there's a lot of difference and you've sort of been able to group your paintings into these distinct categories and things like that, I do see some linking between them all, in particular this idea of change and constant adaptation in your process. And yes, automatism comes to mind for sure as a technique. So this is a technique of painting where the artist normally suppresses conscious thought in order to create their imagery. And this is something I see in your work because you've told me you don't necessarily have an idea before you get to your canvas. You sort of shut down your mind and you end up drawing from a bank of images in your mind. And it's not necessarily one thing or one idea that you're developing. And you call this process subconscious restructuring. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. I try to go for a walk daily along the Telkwa River, which is just a half a block outside of my door. It's beautiful. All throughout, I mean, every day it's a different scene. You know, like we could get heavy snow, it could be thawing the next day. It's just always this. It's visual eye candy. You know, there's just all these things. So when I go on those walks, I try and take these visual snapshots. I try not to do a study of what's in front of me, but I try and take these visual snapshots of weights and textures and reflections and the effect of wind on leaves or something like that, or leaves that seem to be suspended. You know, so I take all these kind of visual snapshots, and sometimes I take actual photographs and bring them back with me, but I'll refer to those photographs really quickly rather than try and do a study of that photograph and try and use that as a basis of the painting. So what ends up happening for the most part is I'll take those images and I'll just go back to start working in my studio, and after a while it looks like it may look like where I've just been without really thinking about it too much, you know. So I think maybe just seeing all those lines and textures and weights and whatever else that works its way into the canvas, and that it could be I mean, this piece here, Passion Tempered by Grace, could very well be inspired by a photograph that I took of that while I was on this walk. You know, it could very well be inspired by that, but then it becomes something else when that reciprocal nature starts to happen, where I start to get inspired by what's happening in the canvas in front of me, and then it gets removed from that original idea or the original image that is in my head about the landscape that I just traveled through or whatever else.
So you have no shortage of inspiration and imagery to pull from in your mind, and constant inspiration from the place that you live. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's a jewel up here for sure.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, what kind of things are you working on now?
Yeah, the Affordable Art Fair is coming up in April, and I'm doing a series of works from the populated series, ink drawings for that. Actually, I'm doing a couple from the Cycle series as well, I think. Just trying to finish up on some guitar building at the same time. You know, I could just paint all day. I really could paint 7 days a week, all day long. But I'm also doing some guitar building and teaching music. And but as far as the painting, yeah, it's mostly that the Affordable Art Fair stuff and doing more works like this on a smaller scale. I'm really enjoying that mark making right now. But it kind of I just watched Arshil Gorky. I just watched a documentary on him, and I was just so inspired, and I loved some of his later works there. And I guess he's considered one of the first abstract expressionists, really. So I'm really enjoying exploring that idea of these smaller characters and these little personalities. Sometimes 50 personalities in a painting. You know, I'm really enjoying that.
That sounds really exciting. And it looks like we're ending on one of your more recent works. Is that right?
It is, yeah. That's called Dogwood. That one was one that was, again, a little more intentional, but it wasn't until after I totally abandoned it as an abstract piece and I just threw some black ink at it and then turned it vertical and then realized, well, there's so many landscape elements about it, you know, that it took very little for me to just pop in some negative painting, negative spaces in between the trees at the top there. And that idea of that reflecting water in the front, that was all kind of there without thinking about it. And the idea of this image down the bottom left corner with, it looks like, it just has all those elements of being, there's a dike just down the road from us, just around the corner from us, that's kind of what it looks like. And I see that every day, but it wasn't until I abandoned trying to do a painting that all of a sudden it was presented. Like, it just showed that's kind of what it is. And that's the witnessing part of it too, right? Like looking at that and saying, well, that looks very much like that, and I could explore that a bit more. And it didn't take much more from that point, from the point of abandoning it to the point of where it's at now,
That's great, Mark. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen now, as that's the end of our slideshow. Well, actually, not quite the end. If any of you would like to know more about Mark and follow along on his on his journey, on his practice in painting and in music, of course, you can follow him online at Mark Thibeault Art on Instagram. You're also on Facebook, is that right?
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And you've got a new website.
I do, yeah, it's very exciting.
That's awesome. I'll stop sharing my screen now, and I'd like to ask you one more question before I turn it over to the audience. What do you hope viewers take away from this exhibition?
Well, I think that it's a simple answer, really. Just inspired to create and to not, something I teach in my workshops is to not get, to not be so precious and about our work, and to not hang our ego and our personality on our work. Allow the work to be itself, and just to be free with our work. And I think that's at least that's what I try and do. But the bottom line of it is first and foremost, just create, just to be inspired to create. Hopefully they find some inspiration from the works and want to create.
I love that. Thanks so much, Mark. So we have a bit of a quiet audience today, but maybe we can spark some questions. You happen to be in one of your studios, and you could perhaps take us for a little tour?
Sure. Tell me if I'm holding this right. So this is the space that I share with Facundo Gastiazoro. He works on that little desk right there, and he's a very clean guy, and I'm a very messy guy. But yeah, this is it's maybe 14 by 14, and I do a lot of watercolors and stuff here. And I've got a great view of, I don't know if you can see this. I'll turn the camera around. Downtown Smithers. Can you see that out the window there? And here's some of the works from last year. It's the only studio in the whole building, out of maybe 10 studios in the building, that has a sink. So I can rinse my brushes and stuff here. I've been in this building, at the Central Park building, for I think 14 years now.
Thanks for that. It's always nice to see where artists work. It's an exciting thing to get to see the behind the scenes part of creating artwork. So thanks for giving us that little tour.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, it looks like our audience is still pretty quiet tonight, but that's okay. We hope that you enjoyed this little Q&A and this little walkthrough of Mark's art practice and some of the installation images from Succession at Two Rivers Gallery and the Rustad Galleria. So please, if you're in Prince George, stop by and take a look at the exhibition. And of course, you can follow Mark on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, or take a look at his website. And I would just like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Any final closing remarks, Mark?
No, thank you to the gallery, yourself, Megan, and George, and
Awesome. Have a good evening, everyone.